The desert heat shimmered off the concrete runway at Camp Bastion, Afghanistan, creating waves that distorted the horizon like a mirage. Captain Sarah Phoenix Martinez adjusted her flight suit and squinted against the glare as she walked toward the line of H-1Z Viper attack helicopters. The morning briefing had been routine, but something in the air felt different today. Maybe it was the way the intelligence officer had hesitated when discussing the target coordinates. Or perhaps it was the unusual radio chatter she'd picked up during her pre-flight checks. Sarah had been flying combat missions for 8 months now, and she developed an instinct for when things weren't quite right. Her call sign Phoenix had come naturally after her first emergency landing in hostile territory, where she'd managed to restart her damaged aircraft and rise from what should have been certain destruction. The Marines in her squadron respected her flying skills, but some of the older pilots still questioned whether women belonged in combat aviation roles. Captain Jake Bulldog Thompson was one of those pilots. A 15-year veteran with 3 deployments under his belt, he stood near his aircraft talking with his crew chief, occasionally glancing in Sarah's direction with what she'd learned to recognize as skeptical amusement. Jake had never been openly hostile, but his comments during briefings often carried an undertone that suggested he viewed her presence as more of a political statement than a tactical asset. "Morning, Phoenix," Jake called out as Sarah approached her aircraft. His tone was friendly enough, but there was something else there. "Heard you got assigned to the Northern Patrol route today. That's usually where they send the new guys to get their feet wet." Sarah stopped and turned to face him, her helmet tucked under her arm. "Actually, I requested that sector. Intelligence reports suggest increased insurgent activity near the village clusters, and I want to make sure our ground units have proper air support if things heat up." Jake chuckled and shook his head. "Always eager to prove yourself, aren't you? Look, I get it. You want to show everyone that women can handle combat aviation just as well as men. But sometimes the best thing a pilot can do is follow orders and not go looking for trouble." The comment stung more than Sarah wanted to admit, but she kept her expression neutral. "I'm not trying to prove anything to anyone, Captain. I'm here to do my job and bring our Marines home safely. Same as you." Sure, Jake said, waving his hand dismissively. "Just remember that flying a helicopter in combat isn't like the simulators back at Pensacola. Out here, hesitation gets people killed, and sometimes you have to make decisions that aren't in the training manual." Sarah felt her jaw tighten. "I've logged over 200 combat hours since arriving in country. I think I understand the difference between training and reality." Jake's crew chief, Sergeant Rodriguez, had been listening to the exchange while pretending to inspect the helicopter's external systems. He'd worked with both pilots extensively and knew that this conversation was heading toward dangerous territory. The squadron couldn't afford internal conflicts when they were operating in such a high-threat environment. "Captain Thompson," Rodriguez interrupted diplomatically, "the bird's ready for your pre-flight inspection. We had to replace one of the main rotor dampers last night, but everything checks out green." Jake nodded and began walking toward his aircraft, but then paused and turned back to Sarah. "You know what, Phoenix? I've been thinking about call signs lately. Yours is pretty dramatic, but I wonder if it really fits. Phoenix implies rising from the ashes after being destroyed. Maybe something like Sparrow would be more appropriate. Small, quick, stays out of trouble." Sarah felt her temper flare, but before she could respond, her own crew chief, Staff Sergeant Williams, appeared at her side. Williams was a 20-year veteran who'd worked on helicopter systems since before Sarah was born. He'd seen plenty of pilots come and go, and he had little patience for ego conflicts that could compromise mission effectiveness. "Captain Martinez," Williams said firmly, "we need to complete the pre-flight inspection if we're going to make the scheduled departure time." Sarah nodded and followed Williams toward her aircraft, but Jake's voice stopped her again. "Tell you what, Phoenix, if you really want to prove that call sign fits, maybe you should request a transfer to one of the special operations units. I hear they're always looking for pilots who think they're invincible." This time Sarah did turn around, and Williams could see the anger flashing in her eyes. Are you suggesting I can't handle regular Marine Corps aviation, Captain? Jake shrugged. I'm just saying that some pilots talk a big game about being elite warriors, but when it comes down to actual combat, they discover they're not quite as tough as they thought. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of the squadron's operations officer approaching. Major Patricia Steele Harrison was a no-nonsense pilot who'd commanded respect through competence rather than politics. She'd been flying helicopters for 12 years and had earned her call sign during a mission in Iraq, where she'd continued flying despite taking small arms fire that had damaged her aircraft's control systems. What's the discussion about? Major Harrison asked, though her tone suggested she already had a good idea. Just talking about call signs, Jake replied casually. How pilots earn them and whether they really reflect their capabilities. Major Harrison looked between the two captains and sighed internally. She'd seen this kind of conflict before, and it never ended well unless it was addressed immediately and directly. Captain Thompson, your aircraft is ready for departure. I suggest you focus on your pre-flight procedures rather than philosophical discussions about call signs. Jake nodded and began walking away, but he couldn't resist one final comment. Just remember, Phoenix in special operations, they use call signs like Geronimo Actual for the unit commander. That's reserved for people who've proven themselves in the most dangerous missions possible. Not exactly Sparrow territory. As Jake disappeared behind his helicopter, Sarah felt a mix of anger and determination burning in her chest. She'd worked harder than most of her male counterparts to earn her place in the squadron, and she wasn't about to let someone like Jake Thompson undermine her confidence or her reputation. Staff Sergeant Williams had been watching the exchange with growing concern. He'd seen good pilots make fatal mistakes when they let personal conflicts affect their judgment, and he could tell that Sarah was struggling to maintain her composure. Captain, Williams said quietly, don't let him get inside your head. I've been working on helicopters since before you were born, and I can tell you that pilot skill has nothing to do with gender and everything to do with training, experience, and decision-making under pressure. Sarah took a deep breath and nodded. Thanks, Sergeant. I know you're right. It's just frustrating when someone questions your abilities based on assumptions rather than performance. Ma'am, I've worked with Captain Thompson on dozens of missions, and while he's a competent pilot, he's also got some old-fashioned ideas about women in combat. But I've also worked with you for 8 months, and I've seen you handle situations that would rattle pilots with twice your experience. Williams began pointing out various systems during the pre-flight inspection, but Sarah could tell he had more to say. What's really on your mind, Sergeant? Williams paused and looked around to make sure they couldn't be overheard. Ma'am, there's something about today's mission that doesn't feel right. The intelligence briefing was too vague, and the target area has been quiet for weeks. Sometimes that means the enemy is planning something big. Sarah had been thinking the same thing. What's your gut telling you? My gut says we're flying into something more complicated than a routine patrol. And if that's the case, you're going to need to trust your training and your instincts, not worry about what Captain Thompson thinks about your call sign. As they completed the pre-flight inspection, Sarah found herself thinking about Jake's comment regarding special operations and the call sign Geronimo Actual. She'd heard rumors about classified missions conducted by elite units, operations that were so sensitive they rarely appeared in official reports. Part of her wondered what it would be like to be involved in that level of military operations, where pilots were expected to handle missions that pushed the boundaries of what was considered possible. But another part of her recognized that Jake's comment had been designed to make her feel inadequate, to suggest that she was playing in the minor leagues while the real warriors operated at a level she could never reach. The frustrating thing was that he might be right. Despite her combat experience and proven capabilities, Sarah knew there were aspects of military aviation that remained closed to her, not because of her skills, but because of bureaucratic policies and cultural attitudes that changed slowly. The sound of rotor blades beginning to spin broke her concentration. Other aircraft in the squadron were starting their engines, which meant departure time was approaching. Sarah climbed into her cockpit and began running through her startup procedures, trying to focus on the technical requirements of flying rather than the emotional residue of her conversation with Jake. Her co-pilot, First Lieutenant Michael Razor Chong, was already strapped in and reviewing the mission briefing materials. Razor was a recent flight school graduate who'd been assigned to Sarah's aircraft 3 months earlier. Initially, he'd been nervous about flying with a female pilot, but his concerns had disappeared after their first combat mission together, where Sarah's quick thinking and precise flying had saved them from an anti-aircraft missile. Ready for another exciting day of routine patrol? Razor asked with a grin. Actually, I don't think today's going to be routine at all, Sarah replied, adjusting her helmet and checking her communication systems. Something feels different about this mission. Razor looked at her with concern. Different how? I'm not sure yet. Maybe it's the way intelligence described the target area, or maybe it's just pilot intuition. But I want you to be especially alert today. If things go sideways, we might need to make decisions quickly. As Sarah ran through her final equipment checks, she couldn't shake the feeling that today's mission would somehow change everything. Whether that change would be positive or negative remained to be seen. But she was determined to prove that her call sign Phoenix represented exactly what she claimed: the ability to rise above any challenge and emerge stronger than before. The radio crackled with the voice of the operations officer. All aircraft, this is base operations. You are cleared for departure on scheduled patrol missions. Weather conditions are clear, visibility unlimited. Be advised that intelligence reports possible increased insurgent activity in northern sectors. Maintain standard communication protocols and report any unusual observations immediately. Sarah felt her heart rate increase slightly as she lifted her helicopter off the ground. Whatever was waiting for them in the northern patrol sector, she was ready to face it. But she also knew that Captain Thompson would be watching her performance carefully, looking for any sign that would validate his doubts about her capabilities. What Sarah didn't know was that this routine patrol mission was about to intersect with a classified special operations mission that would test every aspect of her training, her courage, and her ability to make life-or-death decisions under the most extreme pressure imaginable. By the end of the day, the question of whether she deserved her call sign would be answered definitively, and Jake Thompson would learn something that would change his perspective on women in combat forever. The helicopter rose into the clear Afghan sky, its rotor blades cutting through the thin mountain air as Sarah pointed the aircraft toward the northern patrol sector. Below them, the desert landscape stretched endlessly, dotted occasionally with small villages and agricultural compounds that looked peaceful from altitude, but could hide dangers that wouldn't become apparent until it was too late to avoid them. Razor was scanning the horizon with binoculars while monitoring multiple radio frequencies, listening for any communication that might indicate unusual activity in their assigned patrol area. The routine nature of the mission briefing had been reassuring, but both pilots had learned that in Afghanistan, routine missions could become life-threatening emergencies without warning. "Phoenix, this is Bulldog." Jake's voice crackled over the radio. "I'm showing clear skies and no activity in the southern sector. How's it looking up north?" Sarah keyed her microphone. "Northern sector appears quiet so far. We're approaching the first checkpoint now." "Copy that. Try not to go looking for trouble, Phoenix. Remember, sometimes the best mission is a boring mission." Sarah gritted her teeth, but kept her response professional. "Roger, Bulldog. We'll maintain standard patrol procedures." As they flew deeper into the northern sector, Sarah began to notice subtle signs that something wasn't quite right. The villages below seemed unusually quiet for this time of day, with fewer people visible in the streets and courtyards than she'd observed during previous patrols. Additionally, there were several vehicles parked in locations that didn't make tactical sense for civilian purposes. "Razor, take a look at that compound at 2 o'clock, Sarah said, banking the helicopter slightly to give her co-pilot a better view. "Do those vehicles look like civilian transportation to you?" Razor focused his binoculars on the location Sarah had indicated. After several seconds, he lowered them and looked at her with concern. "Negative. Those are definitely military-style trucks, and they're positioned like they're providing security for something important." Sarah made a note of the coordinates and continued the patrol, but her sense of unease was growing stronger. The intelligence briefing had mentioned possible insurgent activity, but what she was observing suggested something more organized and significant than typical guerrilla operations. 20 minutes later, they discovered what that something was. "Phoenix, I'm seeing movement in the valley ahead," Razor reported, his voice tight with tension. "Multiple vehicles, armed personnel, and what looks like heavy equipment." Sarah adjusted the helicopter's position to get a better view while remaining at sufficient altitude to avoid detection. What she saw made her blood run cold. Below them was a significant insurgent force, much larger and better equipped than anything mentioned in their briefing. More concerning was the fact that they appeared to be preparing for a major offensive operation. "Razor, count the vehicles and personnel. I need accurate numbers for the report. I'm seeing at least 40 vehicles, including several that look like they're carrying heavy weapon systems. Personnel count is difficult to estimate, but it's definitely over 200, possibly 300 individuals." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. This wasn't the small-scale insurgent activity described in their briefing. This was a major enemy force preparing for what could be a devastating attack on coalition positions or Afghan government facilities. "Base operations, this is Phoenix," Sarah transmitted. "We have eyes on a significant enemy force in Sector 7 Alpha. Request immediate guidance." The response was immediate but confusing. "Phoenix, base operations. We show no scheduled activity in Sector 7 Alpha. Can you confirm your coordinates?" Sarah double-checked her navigation systems and confirmed their position. "Base operations, coordinates confirmed. We are observing a large insurgent force with heavy weapons in Sector 7 Alpha. This appears to be preparation for a major offensive operation." There was a long pause before the operations officer responded, and when he did, his voice carried a tension that Sarah had never heard before. "Phoenix, maintain your current position and continue observation. Do not, repeat, do not engage or attempt to interfere with observed activities. We are coordinating with higher headquarters for guidance." The unusual nature of the response sent warning signals through Sarah's mind. In her 8 months of combat operations, she'd never been told to simply observe a major enemy force without taking any action to disrupt their activities or warn potential targets. "Something's not right about this," she told Razor. "Why would they want us to just watch while insurgents prepare for what could be a massive attack?" Razor was thinking the same thing. Maybe there's a larger operation planned that we don't know about. Special operations units sometimes coordinate with regular forces without sharing all the details. Sarah was about to respond when her radio crackled with an encrypted transmission on a frequency she'd never heard used before. "Phoenix, this is Geronimo Actual. Switch to secure channel 7 and maintain radio silence until further notice." The voice was calm and professional, but there was an authority in it that commanded immediate attention. Sarah looked at Razor with surprise. Neither of them had ever heard the call sign Geronimo Actual used in their operational area, but military protocol required them to follow instructions from any higher-ranking unit commander. Sarah switched to the designated secure channel and waited. After several seconds, the same voice came through her headphones, this time with crystal-clear clarity that indicated a sophisticated encryption system. "Phoenix, Geronimo Actual. We are aware of your current observation mission. The enemy force you have identified is known to us and is part of an ongoing special operations mission. You are directed to maintain your current position and provide overwatch support as needed." Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. She was apparently being integrated into a special operations mission, something she'd never experienced before. But she also realized that this meant the situation was far more complex and dangerous than anything in her previous combat experience. "GERONIMO Actual, Phoenix. Request clarification of our role in this operation. Phoenix, your primary mission is observation and communication relay. Secondary mission is close air support if requested. Be advised that you may be required to engage targets without prior clearance from base operations. Do you understand these instructions? The implications of the transmission hit Sarah like a physical blow. She was being given authority to engage enemy forces based solely on the judgment of a special operations commander she'd never met, operating under a classification level that apparently superseded normal chain of command procedures. Geronimo actual. Phoenix understands. Request confirmation of engagement protocols. Phoenix, engagement protocols are simplified for this operation. You are authorized to engage any hostile forces that threaten friendly personnel or mission objectives. Rules of engagement are weapons-free on my authorization. Sarah had never operated under such broad engagement authorities, and she could see that Razor was equally surprised by the unusual nature of their orders. But military training emphasized following lawful orders from superior officers, and there was no question that whoever Geronimo Actual was, he had the authority to direct their actions. Geronimo Actual. Phoenix copies all instructions. We are prepared to provide overwatch and support as directed. Outstanding, Phoenix. Be advised that you are now operating under Special Operations Command protocols. Your actions during this mission are classified and will not appear in standard operational reports. Do you understand the implications of this classification? Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. She was being told that whatever happened during this mission would exist in a classified realm that operated outside normal military documentation procedures. This was exactly the kind of elite operations environment that Jake Thompson had suggested was beyond her capabilities. Geronimo Actual. Phoenix understands classification requirements. Good. Now, Phoenix, I need you to observe the enemy force and report any changes in their activity patterns. We have additional assets moving into position, and your observations will be critical for timing our operations. As Sarah maintained her observation position, she began to notice new activity in the valley below. The insurgent force was beginning to organize into what looked like a convoy formation, suggesting they were preparing to move toward their target. But more interesting was the fact that she could now detect subtle signs of other military forces positioned around the valley's perimeter. Geronimo actual. Phoenix. The enemy force appears to be preparing for movement. I'm also detecting what might be friendly forces in concealed positions around the valley perimeter. Good observation, Phoenix. You're correct on both counts. The enemy is preparing to move toward a target that includes coalition personnel. Our forces are positioned to interdict their movement, but we need precise timing to minimize casualties and maximize operational effectiveness. Sarah realized that she was witnessing the setup for a major special operations mission, possibly one that would become a textbook example of precision military operations. But she also understood that her role was far more critical than simple observation. Her helicopter's weapons systems and maneuverability could make the difference between mission success and disaster. Geronimo Actual. Request permission to move to a more advantageous position for potential engagement. Negative, Phoenix. Maintain current position until specifically directed otherwise. Your location has been carefully calculated to provide optimal support when needed. The response confirmed Sarah's growing understanding that this operation had been planned in detail, with every element positioned precisely to achieve specific tactical objectives. She was no longer flying a routine patrol mission. She had become part of a special operations mission that required skills and judgment at the highest level of military aviation. What Sarah didn't realize was that her performance during this mission was being observed not only by the special operations team below, but also by senior military commanders who were evaluating whether female pilots could be trusted with the most sensitive and dangerous missions in the military's arsenal. The next few hours would determine not only the outcome of the mission, but also the future of her career and the broader question of women's roles in special operations aviation. The insurgent convoy began moving, and Sarah could see that they were heading directly toward what appeared to be a small coalition outpost nestled in the mountains several miles away. If the enemy force reached that position, The small number of coalition personnel stationed there would be completely overwhelmed. Geronimo Actual, Phoenix. Enemy convoy is moving toward what appears to be coalition positions. Request permission to engage. Stand by, Phoenix. The wait seemed eternal, even though it was probably less than 30 seconds. Sarah could see the insurgent vehicles picking up speed, and she calculated that they would reach the coalition outpost within 20 minutes unless someone intervened. Phoenix, GERONIMO Actual. You are cleared to engage the lead vehicles in the convoy. Focus on stopping their movement rather than destroying the entire force. We want to drive them into our prepared positions. Sarah felt her training take over as she switched from observation mode to combat operations. Razor, target the lead vehicle with a Hellfire missile. I want to stop that convoy without giving them time to disperse. Target acquired, Razor reported, his voice calm despite the intensity of the situation. Ready to engage on your command. Engage. The Hellfire missile streaked from beneath their helicopter and struck the lead vehicle with devastating accuracy. The explosion sent debris flying across the desert floor and brought the entire convoy to an immediate halt. Sarah could see insurgent personnel scrambling from their vehicles, trying to assess what had happened and determine the source of the attack. Good hit, Phoenix, came the voice of Geronimo Actual. Now move to position Bravo and prepare to engage targets of opportunity as they present themselves. Sarah banked the helicopter toward the new position, but as she did, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. Several of the insurgent vehicles were equipped with anti-aircraft weapons, and they were now actively searching for the source of the missile attack. Geronimo Actual, Phoenix. Be advised, enemy forces have anti-aircraft capabilities and are actively seeking our position. Copy, Phoenix. Evade as necessary, but maintain overwatch of the valley. Our ground forces are beginning their assault. As Sarah maneuvered to avoid the anti-aircraft fire, she could see special operations forces emerging from concealed positions around the valley. The coordinated assault was a textbook example of precision military operations, with each element moving in perfect synchronization to achieve maximum tactical effectiveness while minimizing exposure to enemy fire. But Sarah also realized that her helicopter was now the primary target for every insurgent with an anti-aircraft weapon. The success of the ground assault depended partly on her ability to provide continued air support while avoiding being shot down by increasingly accurate enemy fire. This is what Jake was talking about, she thought to herself. This is the level of operations where hesitation gets people killed and where you have to make decisions that aren't in any training manual. The next few minutes would test every aspect of her training, her courage, and her ability to function effectively under the most extreme pressure she had ever experienced. And somewhere below her, the mysterious Geronimo Actual was counting on her performance to ensure the success of a mission that could save dozens of coalition lives and disrupt a major enemy offensive operation. The anti-aircraft fire was getting closer with each passing second. Sarah could see the muzzle flashes from multiple positions as insurgent gunners adjusted their aim, trying to track her helicopter's evasive maneuvers. The distinctive crack of bullets passing close to the aircraft sent adrenaline surging through her system, but her training kept her focused on maintaining the delicate balance between providing air support and avoiding catastrophic damage. Phoenix, this is Geronimo Actual. The calm voice came through her headphones. I need you to suppress the anti-aircraft positions on the eastern ridge. Our assault team is taking heavy fire and cannot advance without air support. Sarah looked toward the eastern ridge and immediately spotted 3 separate anti-aircraft positions. The insurgents had chosen their locations well, with natural cover that made them difficult targets while providing excellent fields of fire against both the helicopter and the advancing ground forces. Geronimo Actual, Phoenix. I see 3 anti-aircraft positions on the eastern ridge. Request permission to engage with rockets and cannon fire. Phoenix, you are clear hot. Eliminate those positions immediately. Sarah banked the helicopter hard to the right, presenting the smallest possible target profile while lining up for her attack run. Razor was already adjusting the weapon systems, preparing to engage multiple targets in rapid succession. Razor, I need you to designate targets from north to south. We'll hit them with rockets first, then follow up with cannon fire to make sure they stay suppressed. Roger. First target designated. Range 1,200 meters. Sarah felt the familiar vibration as the 2.75-inch rockets fired from their launch pods. The first salvo struck the northern anti-aircraft position with devastating effect, silencing the heavy machine gun that had been tracking their movements. She immediately adjusted her angle of attack for the second position. Second target designated. Range 1,100 meters. Another salvo of rockets streaked toward the second position, but this time the insurgent gunners had seen the attack coming and were attempting to relocate their weapon. Sarah switched to the helicopter's 20mm cannon and walked a line of high-explosive rounds across the position, ensuring that the anti-aircraft gun would not return to operation. Third target is moving, Razor reported. They're trying to reposition behind that rock formation. Sarah pulled the helicopter into a steep climbing turn, gaining altitude while maintaining visual contact with the fleeing insurgents. The third anti-aircraft position was more mobile than the others, mounted on a technical vehicle that was now racing across the ridge, trying to find new cover. I've got them, Sarah said, rolling into a diving attack that brought the helicopter's cannon to bear on the moving target. The 20mm rounds stitched across the desert floor, converging on the vehicle just as it reached what the crew thought would be safety behind a large boulder. The explosion sent smoke and debris flying across the ridge, marking the end of the anti-aircraft threat from that position. Outstanding work, Phoenix, came the voice of Geronimo Actual. Anti-aircraft threat neutralized. Our assault team is advancing on the primary objective. Sarah pulled out of her attack dive and resumed her overwatch position, but she could see that the situation in the valley was becoming increasingly complex. The initial insurgent convoy had been stopped, but additional enemy forces were arriving from multiple directions, apparently responding to the attack. What had started as an interdiction mission was rapidly evolving into a major engagement. Geronimo Actual, Phoenix. I'm observing additional enemy forces approaching from the south and west. Looks like at least 20 more vehicles with significant personnel. There was a pause before Geronimo Actual responded, and Sarah could hear what sounded like radio communications with other units in the background. Phoenix, we're aware of the additional forces. This operation is expanding beyond our original parameters. I need you to provide close air support for our extraction while we complete the primary mission objective. The calm tone of the Special Operations Commander was reassuring, but Sarah could detect subtle changes that suggested the situation was becoming more challenging than originally anticipated. What's the primary mission objective? Phoenix, the objective is classified above your clearance level. What you need to know is that we have personnel moving toward a specific target, and they need clear corridors for both advancement and withdrawal. Can you provide that support? Sarah felt a moment of uncertainty. Operating in support of a mission whose objectives she didn't understand was outside her normal training and experience. But the professional competence demonstrated by Geronimo Actual suggested that this was a legitimate special operations mission with proper authorization. Geronimo Actual, Phoenix can provide corridor support. Request specific areas where you need enemy forces suppressed. Phoenix, I'm transmitting grid coordinates for 3 separate areas. These are choke points where enemy forces could interfere with our mission. I need you to keep those areas clear of hostile personnel for the next 30 minutes. Sarah's navigation system displayed the transmitted coordinates, showing 3 locations that formed a rough triangle around what appeared to be a small compound in the center of the valley. She could see enemy forces moving toward all 3 positions, apparently attempting to establish blocking positions that would prevent the Special Operations Team from completing their mission. Geronimo Actual, Phoenix has the coordinates, beginning suppression of enemy movement toward designated areas. Sarah began her first attack run against the southernmost choke point, where approximately 40 insurgents were attempting to establish a defensive position using natural cover and abandoned vehicles. Razor designated targets, while Sarah maneuvered the helicopter to maximize the effectiveness of their weapon systems. Multiple targets designated. Range 800 meters. The combination of rockets and cannon fire scattered the insurgent force, but Sarah could see that many of the enemy personnel were taking cover in positions that would be difficult to attack without risking damage to her aircraft. The insurgents were learning to adapt to her tactics, using terrain features that limited her ability to engage effectively. "This is getting more difficult," Razor observed. "They're positioning themselves where we can't hit them without exposing ourselves to concentrated small arms fire." Sarah was thinking the same thing. The insurgent forces were demonstrating a level of tactical sophistication that suggested professional military training rather than typical guerrilla operations. Their coordinated movement and defensive positioning indicated that this was not a random collection of fighters, but rather an organized military unit. Gerónimo actual, Phoenix. Enemy forces are demonstrating advanced tactical capabilities. They're using terrain and positioning to minimize our effectiveness while maximizing their defensive advantages. Copy, Phoenix. We're aware that this is not a typical insurgent force. Intelligence suggests this may be a foreign military unit operating under insurgent cover. Does that change your assessment of the threat level? The revelation hits Sarah like a physical blow. If they were facing a professional military unit rather than insurgent fighters, the danger level was significantly higher. Professional soldiers would have better training, better equipment, and more sophisticated tactics than anything she had encountered in her previous combat missions. Geronimo actual, Phoenix. If we're facing professional military personnel, they may have more advanced anti-aircraft capabilities than we initially assessed. Request guidance on modified engagement protocols. Phoenix engagement protocols remain the same, but exercise extreme caution. These personnel may have man-portable surface-to-air missiles and other advanced weapon systems. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Man-portable surface-to-air missiles were among the most dangerous threats facing helicopter operations. Unlike machine guns and small arms fire, which could be avoided through maneuvering and altitude changes, surface-to-air missiles were designed specifically to destroy aircraft and were extremely difficult to evade. Razor, keep your eyes open for missile launches. If you see anything that looks like a surface-to-air missile, call it out immediately. Roger. I'm scanning continuously, but these guys are good at concealment. Sarah adjusted her tactics, using terrain masking and rapid altitude changes to make it more difficult for potential missile operators to acquire a firing solution. But she also knew that such defensive measures reduced her ability to provide effective close air support for the Special Operations Team. Geronimo actual, Phoenix. Threat of surface-to-air missiles is requiring defensive maneuvering that reduces my ability to provide continuous close air support. Request priority guidance on mission requirements. Phoenix, mission completion is the priority. Accept reasonable risks to ensure successful extraction of our personnel. The response confirmed what Sarah had suspected. This special operations mission was considered so important that aircraft losses would be accepted if necessary to ensure its success. She was being asked to operate in an environment where her helicopter and crew were considered expendable assets if their sacrifice would contribute to the mission's objectives. Understood, Geronimo actual. Phoenix will maintain close air support despite elevated threat levels. As Sarah continued her attacks against the designated choke points, she began to observe the Special Operations Team moving toward their objective. Even from her aerial perspective, she could see that these were not ordinary soldiers. Their movement patterns, equipment, and tactical coordination indicated an extremely high level of training and experience. We may need immediate close air support once we begin the assault. Sarah could see what appeared to be defensive preparations around the compound. Multiple vehicles were positioned to provide covering fire, and Personnel were establishing fighting positions that could create devastating crossfire against any assault force. Geronimo Actual. Phoenix observes significant defensive preparations around the objective. Recommend coordinated assault with air support to minimize casualties. Negative Phoenix. This operation requires precision rather than firepower. We need to capture specific individuals alive, which limits our ability to use heavy weapons. Your role will be suppression of external defensive positions while we handle the compound interior. The requirement to capture personnel alive rather than simply neutralizing the threat added another layer of complexity to an already challenging mission. Sarah would need to provide precise fire support that eliminated external threats without compromising the Special Operations Team's ability to conduct a successful capture operation. Geronimo Actual. Phoenix understands. Precision fire support only, focused on external defensive positions. As the Special Operations Team reached the final approach to their objective, Sarah could see enemy forces converging on the compound from multiple directions. It was becoming clear that the insurgent forces had been expecting an attack and had prepared a coordinated defense that included reinforcements positioned outside the immediate target area. Geronimo Actual. Phoenix. Enemy reinforcements are moving toward the compound from 3 different directions. You may be facing a larger force than originally anticipated. Phoenix, we're tracking the reinforcements. Our mission timeline is now critical. We need to complete the objective and extract within the next 15 minutes, or we'll be facing overwhelming numbers. The tension in Geronimo Actual's voice was subtle, but unmistakable. The Special Operations Team was operating on a strict timeline that left little room for complications or delays. If they couldn't complete their mission and extract within the specified time frame, they would face the possibility of being surrounded and overwhelmed by superior numbers. Geronimo Actual. Phoenix is prepared to provide maximum support for rapid mission completion. Sarah watched as the Special Operations Team began their assault on the compound. The initial breach was executed with textbook precision, with multiple entry points being attacked simultaneously to overwhelm the defenders and prevent coordinated resistance. But she could also see that the external defensive positions were beginning to concentrate their fire on the compound, attempting to trap the Special Operations Team inside. Geronimo Actual. Phoenix. External defensive positions are increasing fire on the compound. Request permission to engage immediately. Phoenix, you're cleared to engage external positions. Focus on the heavy weapons positions first, then suppress personnel concentrations. Sarah rolled into her attack, targeting the heaviest weapons first to reduce the immediate threat to the Special Operations Team. The 20mm cannon proved devastatingly effective against the truck-mounted heavy machine guns that had been providing the most dangerous fire. One by one, the external defensive positions fell silent under the precise application of air-delivered firepower. But as Sarah pulled out of her attack run, Razor called out a warning that made her blood turn cold. Missile launch. Surface-to-air missile, bearing 270. Sarah immediately threw the helicopter into a series of violent, evasive maneuvers, dispensing chaff and flares while diving toward the ground to break the missile's tracking solution. The surface-to-air missile streaked past the aircraft, missing by less than 50 feet before exploding harmlessly in the distance. That was too close, Razor said, his voice tight with tension. Where did it come from? Sarah asked, scanning the terrain for the launch position. Northern Ridge, approximately 2 kilometers. I saw the smoke trail, but I can't pinpoint the exact location. Sarah knew that somewhere in the rocks and ravines of the Northern Ridge was a surface-to-air missile team with at least one more missile ready to fire. They had already demonstrated their ability to achieve a near miss, and their next shot would likely be more accurate as they refined their targeting data. Geronimo Actual. Phoenix. Surface-to-air missile engagement from Northern Ridge. 1 missile evaded, unknown number of additional missiles available. Copy, Phoenix. Can you continue to provide close air support? The question forced Sarah to make one of the most difficult decisions of her military career. Continuing to provide close air support would almost certainly result in additional missile attacks, with decreasing probability of successful evasion. But discontinuing air support could result in the Special Operations Team being overwhelmed by enemy forces and potentially captured or killed. Geronimo Actual, Phoenix will continue close air support. Be advised that aircraft survivability is becoming marginal. Understood, Phoenix. Mission completion in approximately 10 minutes. Can you maintain support for that duration? Sarah looked at Razor, who nodded grimly. They both understood that 10 minutes in a surface-to-air missile threat environment was an eternity, but they also understood that the Special Operations Team was counting on their continued support for mission success and safe extraction. Geronimo Actual, Phoenix will maintain support for 10 minutes. As Sarah positioned her helicopter for continued close air support, she couldn't help but think about Jake Thompson's comments regarding call signs and her ability to handle elite military operations. In less than an hour, she had been integrated into a classified special operations mission that was testing every aspect of her training and courage. Whether she deserved her Phoenix call sign was no longer a question. She was living up to it under the most extreme circumstances imaginable. But the most dangerous part of the mission was still ahead. The Special Operations Team needed to extract from the compound and reach a safe extraction point while being pursued by overwhelming enemy forces. And Sarah's helicopter, already damaged from near-miss by a surface-to-air missile, would be their primary protection during the most vulnerable phase of the operation. The next 10 minutes would determine not only the success of the mission, but also whether Captain Sarah Phoenix Martinez would live up to her call sign by rising above what seemed like certain destruction, or whether she would become another casualty of the unforgiving reality of special operations warfare. The explosion from inside the compound signaled that the Special Operations Team had completed their primary objective. Sarah could see personnel moving quickly toward the extraction point, while other team members provided covering fire against the remaining enemy positions. But she could also see that the enemy reinforcements were arriving faster than anticipated, with fresh forces approaching from multiple directions. Phoenix, Geronimo Actual. Primary objective complete. We are beginning extraction sequence. I need you to establish a defensive perimeter around Extraction Zone Alpha. Sarah immediately adjusted her position to provide coverage for the designated extraction zone. But as she began her approach, Razor called out another missile warning. Multiple missile launches. I count 3 surface-to-air missiles, bearing varying. The enemy had coordinated their missile attack to come from different directions simultaneously, making successful evasion nearly impossible. Sarah threw the helicopter into the most violent maneuvers of her career, dispensing all remaining chaff and flares while diving toward the ground at maximum speed. The first missile passed overhead by mere feet, its proximity fuse failing to detonate due to the chaff cloud. The second missile was fooled by flares and exploded harmlessly to the east. But the third missile maintained its track despite all defensive measures, closing rapidly on the helicopter's position. Impact in 3 seconds. Razor shouted. Sarah pulled the helicopter into a knife-edge turn that stressed the aircraft beyond normal operational limits. The surface-to-air missile flashed past the main rotor disc, missing the aircraft by less than 10 feet before exploding against a rock formation behind them. The shockwave from the explosion buffeted the helicopter violently, and Sarah felt the aircraft shudder as debris struck the fuselage. Damage assessment. Sarah called out, fighting to maintain control as warning lights illuminated across the instrument panel. Razor quickly scanned the helicopter systems while Sarah checked the flight controls. We've got damage to the tail rotor assembly and possible hydraulic leaks, but primary systems are still functional. We can continue operations, but maneuverability is reduced. Sarah tested the helicopter's responsiveness and confirmed that while the aircraft was still flyable, its performance had been significantly degraded. The damaged tail rotor made precise maneuvering more difficult, and The hydraulic leaks would eventually affect the aircraft's control systems if not addressed. Geronimo actual, Phoenix. Aircraft has sustained damage from missile near-miss. Systems are functional, but performance is degraded. Can continue mission support for limited duration. Phoenix, we need 15 more minutes of support to complete extraction. Can you maintain that long? Sarah quickly calculated the helicopter's remaining capabilities against the requirements of the mission. 15 minutes was at the outer edge of what she could reasonably expect from the damaged aircraft, especially if they faced additional missile attacks or intensive combat maneuvering. Geronimo actual. Phoenix can provide 15 minutes of support, but aircraft survivability decreases significantly with each passing minute. Understood, Phoenix. Your support is critical for successful extraction. We have personnel who cannot be left behind. The reference to personnel who could not be left behind suggested that the Special Operations Team had captured high-value targets during their assault on the compound. Such captures were often more valuable than any amount of destroyed equipment, providing intelligence information that could prevent future attacks and save coalition lives. Geronimo actual, Phoenix will provide continued support, moving to establish defensive perimeter around extraction zone. As Sarah maneuvered the damaged helicopter toward the extraction zone, she could see the Special Operations Team moving across the terrain with professional efficiency. Despite the intense enemy pressure and the complexity of their mission, they maintained disciplined formation while carrying what appeared to be captured personnel and seized materials. But she could also see that enemy forces were converging on the extraction zone from multiple directions, apparently recognizing that preventing the extraction would be their last opportunity to defeat the Special Operations mission. The next 15 minutes would see the most intensive combat of the entire engagement. Geronimo actual. Phoenix observes enemy forces converging on extraction zone from north, east, and south. Estimated strength over 100 personnel with vehicle support. Copy, Phoenix. Our extraction assets are en route, but will not arrive for 12 minutes. We need to hold the extraction zone until then. Sarah realized that her damaged helicopter was the primary asset preventing the Special Operations Team from being overwhelmed by superior numbers. Despite the reduced performance and increasing mechanical problems, she needed to provide effective close air support against a numerically superior enemy force for 12 critical minutes. Geronimo actual. Phoenix beginning suppression of enemy forces approaching extraction zone. Sarah began her attack runs against the approaching enemy forces, but the helicopter's reduced maneuverability made her more vulnerable to ground fire while decreasing the precision of her weapons delivery. She had to accept greater risks to achieve the same level of effectiveness she had demonstrated earlier in the mission. The first attack run targeted the northern approach, where approximately 40 enemy personnel were advancing with vehicle support. Sarah's rockets and cannon fire scattered the formation and destroyed 2 vehicles, but she took several hits from concentrated small arms fire during her attack. Additional warning lights appeared on the instrument panel, indicating further system degradation. Razor, how are we looking? Engine parameters are still green, but we're losing hydraulic pressure steadily. I estimate maybe 10 more minutes before flight controls become seriously compromised. The hydraulic system damage was more serious than initially assessed. Without adequate hydraulic pressure, the helicopter's control systems would become increasingly difficult to operate, eventually reaching the point where continued flight would be impossible. Geronimo actual, Phoenix. Aircraft damage is worse than initially reported. We may not be able to continue operations for the full extraction timeline. Phoenix, how much time can you give us? Sarah looked at the hydraulic pressure gauges and made a quick calculation based on the rate of pressure loss. Geronimo actual. Maximum 10 minutes before aircraft becomes unflyable. Possibly less if we take additional damage. There was a pause before Geronimo actual responded, and Sarah could hear the sound of gunfire in the background, indicating that the Special Operations Team was already under direct attack. Phoenix, we'll work with whatever time you can give us. Our extraction assets have been notified and are increasing speed, but We still need 8 more minutes minimum. The mathematics were unforgiving. Sarah could provide approximately 10 minutes of continued air support, but the extraction assets needed 8 minutes minimum to arrive. There is almost no margin for error, and any additional aircraft damage or unexpected complications could result in mission failure. Gerónimo actual. Phoenix understands. Continuing close air support with all available resources. Sarah threw the helicopter into another attack run, this time targeting the eastern approach where enemy forces were attempting to establish positions that would provide direct fire into the extraction zone. The damaged aircraft responded sluggishly to her control inputs, but she managed to deliver accurate fire that disrupted the enemy advance. But during the attack run, Razor spotted something that made their situation dramatically worse. Sarah, I'm seeing what looks like a vehicle-mounted surface-to-air missile system moving into position on the western ridge. If they get set up, we'll be sitting ducks. Sarah looked toward the western ridge and confirmed Razor's observation. A tracked vehicle equipped with multiple missile launchers was positioning itself where it would have an unobstructed shot at their helicopter. Unlike the man-portable missiles they had already faced, a vehicle-mounted system would have radar guidance and multiple missiles ready to fire. Gerónimo actual. Phoenix. Vehicle-mounted surface-to-air missile system is positioning on Western Ridge. This represents an extreme threat to continued air operations. Copy, Phoenix. Can you engage the missile system? Sarah evaluated the tactical situation quickly. The vehicle-mounted missile system was positioned approximately 2 kilometers away at the maximum effective range of her weapons systems. Attacking it would require flying directly toward the target, exposing her damaged aircraft to concentrated fire from multiple enemy positions along the way. Geronimo actual. Phoenix can engage the missile system, but the attack profile will expose us to significant additional damage. Aircraft may not survive the engagement. Phoenix, if that missile system becomes operational, you definitely won't survive. Your call on tactics. The decision was ultimately Sarah's to make, and she understood the implications clearly. Attempting to destroy the missile system might save her aircraft from certain destruction, but it might also result in losing the aircraft during the attack. Not attacking the missile system would almost certainly result in the helicopter being shot down within the next few minutes. Geronimo actual. Phoenix is engaging the missile system. If we don't survive, continue extraction operations without air support. Roger, Phoenix. Good hunting. Sarah banked the helicopter toward the western ridge, knowing that this attack run would likely determine whether she and Razor survived the mission. The damaged aircraft struggled to maintain altitude as she climbed to gain a better attack angle, and she could feel the flight controls becoming increasingly unresponsive due to the hydraulic pressure loss. Razor, I need you to designate that missile vehicle and prepare for immediate engagement. We'll probably only get one shot at this. Target designated. Range 1,900 meters and closing. As Sarah flew toward the missile vehicle, enemy forces along her flight path opened fire with everything they had. Small arms fire, machine guns, and even rocket-propelled grenades filled the air around the helicopter. The aircraft shuddered under multiple impacts, and several more warning lights illuminated on the instrument panel. Taking heavy fire. Systems are degrading rapidly. Razor called out. Sarah ignored the enemy fire and focused on maintaining her attack heading. The missile vehicle was growing larger in her sights, and she could see the crew frantically trying to complete their firing preparations before the helicopter reached weapon range. Range 1,500 meters. Coming into firing range now. Sarah triggered a full salvo of rockets, followed immediately by sustained cannon fire. The combination of high explosive rockets and 20mm rounds struck the missile vehicle in rapid succession, creating a series of explosions that completely destroyed the threat. Secondary explosions from the vehicle's missile ammunition continued for several seconds, confirming that the system had been eliminated. But the attack run had cost Sarah's helicopter dearly. Multiple systems were now showing failures, Hydraulic pressure had dropped to critical levels, and she could smell smoke in the cockpit that suggested electrical damage. Geronimo actual, Phoenix. Missile system destroyed, but aircraft is critically damaged. We may not be able to continue operations much longer. Phoenix, extraction assets are 2 minutes out. Can you hold for 2 more minutes? Sarah looked at the instrument panel, which was now displaying more warning lights than normal indications. The helicopter was still flying, but barely, and she could feel the flight controls becoming increasingly unresponsive with each passing second. Geronimo actual. Phoenix will attempt to maintain operations for 2 minutes, but aircraft condition is deteriorating rapidly. As Sarah struggled to keep the damaged helicopter in the air, she could see extraction helicopters approaching from the east. The sight of the incoming aircraft filled her with relief, knowing that the Special Operations Team would soon have a way out of their dangerous situation. But she could also see that enemy forces were making a final desperate assault on the extraction zone, apparently recognizing that this was their last opportunity to prevent the mission's success. Heavy fire was being directed at both the Special Operations Team and the approaching extraction aircraft. Geronimo actual, Phoenix. Enemy forces are concentrating fire on extraction zone and incoming aircraft. Attempting final suppression run. Negative, Phoenix. Your aircraft is too damaged. Save yourself and extract immediately. The order came from Geronimo actual, but Sarah could see that without continued air support, the enemy forces might succeed in preventing the extraction helicopters from landing safely. The Special Operations Team and their captured personnel were in immediate danger of being overrun. Geronimo actual, Phoenix is making final suppression run. Extract immediately when landing zone is clear. Sarah pointed the damaged helicopter toward the largest concentration of enemy forces and triggered all remaining weapons. Rockets and cannon fire poured into the enemy positions, scattering their formations and reducing the intensity of fire directed at the extraction zone. But the final attack run pushed the helicopter's damaged systems beyond their limits. Hydraulic pressure dropped to 0. Electrical systems began failing throughout the aircraft, and Sarah realized that she was about to lose complete control of the helicopter. Razor, prepare for emergency landing. We're going down. As the helicopter began its uncontrolled descent toward the desert floor, Sarah could see the extraction helicopters successfully landing in the zone she had just cleared with her final attack. The Special Operations Team was running toward the aircraft with their captured personnel and seized materials, apparently successful in completing their mission despite the overwhelming enemy pressure. Geronimo actual, Phoenix is going down approximately 1 kilometer south of extraction zone. Mission appears successful. Take care of the team. Sarah fought to control the helicopter's descent, trying to find a landing spot that would maximize their chances of survival. The aircraft was falling rapidly, but her training and experience allowed her to maintain some control over the crash trajectory. The helicopter struck the ground hard, bounced once, and rolled onto its side before finally coming to rest against a large rock formation. Sarah felt the impact through her entire body, but her safety harness and helmet had protected her from serious injury. Beside her, Razor was conscious but appeared to be stunned by the crash. Razor, are you okay? Yeah, I think so. Just shaken up. How about you? Nothing broken. We need to get out of here before this thing catches fire. Sarah quickly shut down the remaining helicopter systems and helped Razor exit through the damaged cockpit. As they moved away from the crashed aircraft, she could hear the sound of extraction helicopters departing to the east, carrying the Special Operations Team and their captured personnel to safety. Looks like the mission was successful, Razor observed, watching the helicopters disappear into the distance. Yeah, it was. And we're still alive, which is better than I expected about 5 minutes ago. As Sarah and Razor took cover behind a rock formation, they could see enemy forces beginning to move toward their crash site. But they could also see coalition ground forces approaching from another direction, apparently responding to their emergency locator beacon. Phoenix, This is Geronimo Actual. The familiar voice came through Sarah's survival radio. Are you and your co-pilot mobile? Geronimo Actual, Phoenix. We are both mobile with minor injuries. Aircraft is destroyed, but enemy forces are approaching our position. Copy, Phoenix. Coalition ground forces are en route to your location. Estimated arrival in 10 minutes. Can you evade until then? Sarah looked at the approaching enemy forces and calculated that she and Razor could probably avoid contact for 10 minutes by using the terrain features around the crash site for concealment. Geronimo Actual, Phoenix can evade for 10 minutes. Thanks for sending the cavalry. Phoenix, it's the least we could do. You saved this mission and probably save a lot of lives. Outstanding performance under extreme conditions. As Sarah and Razor moved to a more defensible position to wait for rescue, she reflected on the events of the past few hours. She had been tested under conditions that exceeded anything in her previous experience, and she had proven capable of operating effectively in the most elite levels of military operations. Jake Thompson's questions about her call sign and her ability to handle special operations missions had been answered definitively. She had not only survived, but had made critical contributions to a successful mission that would probably never appear in any public record. But, more importantly, she had discovered something about herself that no amount of training or routine missions could have revealed. Under the most extreme pressure, when lives depended on split-second decisions, and when aircraft survival was marginal at best, she had found the inner strength to continue fighting until the mission was complete. The sound of approaching coalition vehicles broke her concentration. In a few minutes, she and Razor would be rescued and returned to base, where they would undergo debriefing and medical evaluation. But she knew that this mission had changed her fundamentally, proving that she belonged in the most challenging environments that military aviation had to offer. What she didn't know was that her performance during this mission had been observed and evaluated by senior commanders who were making decisions about the future of women in special operations aviation. The next phase of her career would be shaped by what had happened during these few hours in the Afghan desert. And somewhere in the classified files of the special operations community, a mission report would be filed that described the actions of Captain Sarah Phoenix Martinez in terms that would ensure her reputation was established permanently among the elite pilots who operated in the shadow world of classified military operations 3 days after the mission. Sarah found herself sitting in a sterile debriefing room at Bagram Airfield, facing a panel of officers she had never seen before. The men wore uniforms that bore no unit identifications, and their questions were far more detailed and sophisticated than anything she had experienced in previous mission debriefings. Captain Martinez, the lead officer, began, consulting a classified folder. Your actions during Operation Silent Thunder exceeded all expectations. We'd like to discuss some of the tactical decisions you made during the engagement. Sarah had not heard the mission referred to as Operation Silent Thunder before, and the use of a formal operation name suggested that the events in the valley had been far more significant than she had initially understood. Yes, sir. I'm prepared to answer any questions about my actions during the mission. Let's start with your decision to engage the vehicle-mounted surface-to-air missile system despite the extreme risk to your aircraft. Walk us through your decision-making process. Sarah thought carefully before responding. The tactical situation had required split-second decisions based on incomplete information, but she needed to articulate her reasoning in a way that demonstrated professional judgment rather than reckless endangerment. Sir, the vehicle-mounted missile system represented an immediate threat not only to my aircraft but also to the extraction helicopters. Based on my assessment of the tactical situation, allowing that system to become operational would have resulted in mission failure and possible loss of the special operations team. And you made this assessment despite knowing that your aircraft was already critically damaged? Yes, sir. The aircraft damage reduced our survivability, but mission success required elimination of the missile threat. In my judgment, the risk was acceptable given the potential consequences of inaction. The lead officer made notes in his folder while the other panel members exchanged glances. Sarah could sense that her responses were being evaluated against criteria that extended far beyond normal operational procedures. Captain Martinez, what did you know about the identity of Geronimo Actual during the mission? The question surprised Sarah. She had assumed that the identity of the Special Operations Commander would remain classified indefinitely, and she hadn't expected to be asked about it during her debriefing. Sir, I knew nothing about Geronimo Actual's identity during the mission. I followed his instructions based on his apparent authority and the tactical situation we were facing. And you had no concerns about operating under the command of an unknown special operations unit? Sarah considered the question carefully. Military protocol required following lawful orders from superior officers, but the unusual nature of the mission had pushed the boundaries of normal command relationships. Sir, the tactical situation required immediate response to prevent mission failure and possible loss of life. Geronimo Actual demonstrated professional competence and appropriate authority. Under the circumstances, I believe following his instructions was the correct course of action. The lead officer closed his folder and leaned back in his chair. Captain Martinez, I can now inform you that Geronimo Actual was Colonel James Harrison, commander of the 75th Ranger Regiment Special Operations Task Force. The mission you supported resulted in the capture of 3 high-value targets who had been planning a major terrorist attack against coalition facilities. The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had been operating under the direct command of one of the most senior special operations officers in Afghanistan, supporting a mission that had prevented what could have been a catastrophic terrorist attack. Sir, I had no idea the mission was of that significance. That's exactly why we selected you for this discussion, Captain. Your performance during Operation Silent Thunder was evaluated not only by Colonel Harrison, but also by senior commanders from multiple special operations units. They were unanimously impressed by your tactical judgment, your ability to operate under extreme pressure, and your willingness to accept personal risk to ensure mission success. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. The formal nature of the debriefing and the presence of unknown officers was beginning to make sense. This wasn't a routine after-action review. This was something far more significant. Captain Martinez, another officer, interjected. We'd like to discuss your future career options. Based on your performance during Operation Silent Thunder, you've been nominated for assignment to the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. The 160th SOAR was the most elite helicopter unit in the United States military, conducting the most dangerous and sensitive missions in the special operations community. Assignment to the 160th was considered the pinnacle of military aviation careers. Sir, I'm honored by the nomination, but I understood that the 160th wasn't currently accepting female pilots. That policy is under review, Captain. Your performance during Operation Silent Thunder has demonstrated that gender is irrelevant when evaluating pilot capabilities under extreme conditions. Several senior commanders have recommended that the 160th should evaluate candidates based solely on performance rather than demographic characteristics. Sarah struggled to process the implications of what she was hearing. Not only was she being considered for assignment to the most elite aviation unit in the military, but her performance was apparently being used to challenge existing policies regarding women in special operations. What would such an assignment involve, she asked. The lead officer reopened his folder and consulted several documents before responding. Captain Martinez, assignment to the 160th would require additional specialized training, including advanced tactics, classified mission procedures, and integration with special operations ground units. The training is extremely demanding, with a failure rate exceeding 60%. And if I successfully complete the training, you would become one of approximately 50 pilots in the world qualified to conduct the most sensitive special operations missions. Your missions would be classified at levels that don't appear in any public records, and your actions could directly impact national security operations worldwide. The offer represented everything Sarah had dreamed about since beginning her military aviation career. But she also understood that accepting would mean entering a world where the stakes were higher than anything she had previously experienced. "Sir, I'm extremely interested in the opportunity, but I need to ask about Captain Thompson's concerns regarding women in combat aviation. Are there other officers who share his doubts about female pilots in special operations?" The lead officer's expression became more serious. "Captain Martinez, there are officers throughout the special operations community who have concerns about gender integration. However, Colonel Harrison's mission report specifically addresses this issue. Would you like me to read his recommendations?" "Yes, sir." The officer pulled out a classified document and began reading. "Captain Martinez demonstrated exceptional tactical judgment, personal courage, and professional competence under extreme combat conditions. Her performance exceeded that of many male pilots with significantly more experience. I recommend immediate consideration for special operations training without regard to gender-based restrictions. Any officer who questions female pilots' capabilities after reviewing this mission report is allowing personal bias to override objective performance evaluation." Sarah felt a surge of pride and validation. Colonel Harrison's recommendation carried enormous weight in the special operations community, and his explicit endorsement of her capabilities would silence critics like Jake Thompson. "Captain Martinez," another panel member said, "we should also inform you that your actions during Operation Silent Thunder have resulted in several commendations that will become part of your permanent record. While the specific mission details will remain classified, your demonstrated capabilities under extreme conditions are now documented at the highest levels of the military command structure." The meeting continued for another hour, covering details about specialized training, security clearances, and the lifestyle changes associated with special operations assignments. By the time the debriefing concluded, Sarah had a clear understanding that her career trajectory had fundamentally changed as a result of one mission that had tested every aspect of her training and character. As she walked out of the debriefing room, Sarah reflected on the events that had brought her to this point. Jake Thompson's dismissive comments about her call sign and her capabilities had inadvertently motivated her to prove herself under the most challenging conditions possible. What had started as a routine patrol mission had become a defining moment that opened doors she hadn't even known existed. But she also understood that accepting assignment to the 160th SOAR would mean entering a world where every mission could be as dangerous as Operation Silent Thunder. The specialized training, classified missions, and extreme operating conditions would test her capabilities on a regular basis rather than as a once-in-a-career exception. That evening, Sarah called her family to discuss the opportunity, though she could only speak in general terms about the nature of the assignment due to security classifications. The conversation was difficult because she couldn't explain the specific events that had led to the opportunity, but her family could hear the excitement and determination in her voice. "Are you sure this is what you want?" her mother asked. "It sounds extremely dangerous." "Mom, everything about military aviation is dangerous. This would just be a different kind of danger, supporting missions that could make a real difference in protecting our country. And you feel like you're ready for that level of responsibility?" Sarah thought about her performance during Operation Silent Thunder, about the split-second decisions that had meant the difference between mission success and failure, about the moment when she had chosen to attack the missile system despite knowing it could cost her life. "Yes, Mom, I'm ready." 2 weeks later, Sarah received official orders assigning her to the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment for specialized training. The orders included a note from Colonel Harrison. "Captain Martinez, your performance during Operation Silent Thunder demonstrated that you possess the tactical judgment and personal courage required for special operations aviation. I look forward to working with you on future missions where the stakes are even higher." As Sarah prepared to leave Afghanistan for her new assignment, she encountered Jake Thompson in the Squadron Operations Center. The conversation that followed would be dramatically different from their previous interactions. "Phoenix," Jake said, approaching her with a serious expression, "I heard about your new assignment. Congratulations. Thanks, Jake. I know you had some doubts about my capabilities. Jake looked uncomfortable, clearly struggling with how to address their previous conversations. Sarah, I owe you an apology. I let my personal biases affect my professional judgment, and that was wrong. I've heard enough details about your recent mission to understand that you've proven yourself under conditions that would challenge any pilot. I appreciate that, Jake. We all have preconceptions that we need to examine and challenge. I also want you to know that I've learned something from watching your performance. Gender doesn't determine pilot capability, and I was wrong to suggest otherwise. You've earned your call sign Phoenix through actions that most pilots will never match. The acknowledgement meant more to Sarah than Jake probably realized. Having her capabilities recognized by someone who had previously doubted them validated everything she had worked to achieve throughout her career. Jake, your doubts actually motivated me to push harder and prove myself more thoroughly. In some ways, I should probably thank you for challenging me. Maybe, but I should have recognized your capabilities without requiring you to prove them under life-threatening conditions. As Sarah packed her equipment for departure, she reflected on how much had changed in such a short time. 3 weeks earlier, she had been flying routine patrol missions while dealing with colleagues who questioned her presence in combat aviation. Now she was preparing for assignment to the most elite helicopter unit in the world with the endorsement of senior special operations commanders. The morning of her departure, Sarah walked out to the flight line one last time to see the helicopters she had been flying for the past 8 months. The squadron was conducting normal operations, with aircraft departing for routine missions that no longer seemed adequate for her expanded capabilities and ambitions. Staff Sergeant Williams found her there, standing near the helicopter she had been flying before Operation Silent Thunder. "Captain, I heard about your new assignment. The whole squadron is proud of what you've accomplished." "Thanks, Sergeant. I'm going to miss working with professionals like you." "Ma'am, can I ask you something?" "Of course. During that classified mission you flew, were you scared?" Sarah considered the question carefully. Military culture often discouraged admitting fear, but she had learned that honest self-assessment was more valuable than false bravado. "Terrified, Sergeant. But the fear helped me focus on what needed to be done rather than what could go wrong." "That's what I thought. Real courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what needs to be done despite being afraid." "Where did you learn that?" 20 years of watching good pilots make difficult decisions under pressure. You got what it takes for special operations, Captain. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. As Sarah boarded the transport aircraft that would take her to her new assignment, she carried with her the knowledge that she had proven herself capable of operating effectively in the most challenging environment military aviation had to offer. But she also understood that the training and missions ahead would test her capabilities in ways that Operation Silent Thunder had only begun to reveal. The conversation with Geronimo Actual Colonel Harrison had lasted only a few minutes during the heat of combat, but it had changed the trajectory of her entire career. She had demonstrated under extreme pressure that she possessed the tactical judgment, personal courage, and professional competence required for special operations aviation. Now she would have the opportunity to develop those capabilities even further, working with the most elite pilots in the world on missions where the margin for error was zero, and the consequences of failure could affect national security operations worldwide. As the aircraft climbed into the clear Afghan sky, Sarah looked down at the landscape where she had proven herself worthy of her call sign Phoenix. The desert terrain stretched endlessly below, hiding the location where she had made the most difficult decisions of her career and emerged stronger than before. The next phase of her journey would take her to a world where such decisions would become routine rather than exceptional, where every mission would test her capabilities under conditions that pushed the boundaries of what was considered possible. And somewhere in the classified files of the Special Operations community, the mission report from Operation Silent Thunder would serve as evidence that gender was irrelevant when evaluating pilot capabilities under extreme conditions. Captain Sarah Phoenix Martinez had risen from the ashes of doubt and skepticism to earn her place among the elite warriors of the Special Operations aviation community. The journey ahead would be even more challenging, but She was ready to face whatever tests awaited her in the shadow world of classified military operations. 6 months later, Sarah stood in the operations briefing room at Hunter Army Airfield, Georgia, home of the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. The training had been the most demanding experience of her military career, pushing her capabilities far beyond anything she had previously imagined possible. Of the 37 pilots